Hey, it's Paris. You know, I love sparkly things, right? Like stars. Duh. And thanks to Hilton and AutoCamp, I just slept under them. Picture me, serving looks by the fire outside my luxurious Airstream, making s'mores with the kids, while a national park is our backdrop. The great outdoors meets Hilton hospitality. That's hot. Explore all the new ways to stay at Hilton.com. Hilton for the stay.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed's sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Hi, everybody, and welcome to the Dr. Psych Mom Show. Today, I am going to talk about lived experience in a therapist or a coach, whoever you're working with, and whether I consider that to be important. And I've talked about this a little bit before, and whether you should pick a therapist who's like you or not like you. And so I'm not going to, reinvent the wheel with that one. I'll link to it in this handy dandy feature on Spotify where I can link to my other podcasts, which they are not paying me to talk about, which I just think is pretty cool because if you know me and my writing, you know I love to link back so that you can get more information about anything you're specifically interested in by just reading one post and then clicking through all the links. A remnant of getting my PhD and all the research training and all the citations. Anyway, so I've talked about whether it's important to get somebody who's similar to you or not, but it's more than that, and I will get into that right as soon as I tell you to subscribe. My most recent subscriber episode was on whether I recommend preventive couples counseling, and I don't really know if that word's preventive or preventative. Something tells me that it's going to be both, but I'm just going to pause and check that. Cool, so no difference according to Merriam-Webster, so I don't have to go back and change the title or anything. So I neither recommend preventative nor preventive couples counseling, and you can hear why if you listen to the most recent subscriber episode, which is just one of 200 extra ones that you get for $8.99 a month if you subscribe. So anyway, long lead up to, that's really only 1 minute lead up to the topic, which is lived experience. And when I was young, I was training and they were like teaching us how to do ADHD assessments on children and then of course manualized, which means you follow a manual, treatments for ADHD and for ODD and all these things for kids. They're teaching us, obviously you got to learn somewhere, right? And we're all pretty young in our 20s. None of us had children. And they said, if a parent asks you, well, do you have kids yourself? And if you don't have kids, how could you work with a kid? Then you say, does your oncologist need to have cancer? And I'm like, what the hell? Like, listen, it sounded good at the time, like everything, right? It sounded really smart. Oh, what a witty and incisive retort. But you know what? I mean, the real thing that you should say is, listen, man, this is a training clinic. You're paying very little money. I'm going to try my damned hardest, but I have no idea what it's like to be a parent. And I'm sorry. And if I could be a parent, if you could pick a clinician who is a parent, of course you would, obviously. That's like what you should really say, but of course you're not going to say that. And there are benefits, obviously, of course, to being young and new. And my God, did I think so much about every individual client I had, read like this, like 10 books per client. Of course, those were my first clients, so I had not read books yet, but you get so invested in them. Wonderful. Like everything, there's no free lunch. Everything makes up for everything else. Fine. But does it really, because I'll tell you something. And I've said this before, if I could go to an oncologist who also had cancer, I would, because they have a different perspective. And would I learn parenting training from somebody who'd not been a parent? No, I wouldn't. Because as soon as you become a parent, you're like, oh, all those things I thought before I was a parent were really stupid, just really stupid and wrong. And not all of them, not like your deepest values. I want to teach my child, to read, or like to be a good person or to give charity. Okay, cool. But like how are you going to talk to a child? What's your day going to look like? What's your schedule going to look like? How much you're going to prioritize self-care, versus taking care of the child? Like, you just don't even know anything. And it's the sort of thing where if you have a child and you have a therapist or a coach or a teacher or a tutor or anything who's also had a child, then they have an experience of being a child, then they have experience of not having a child yet, and then they have another experience called having a child. Whereas the people that don't have kids just have had being a kid and not having had a kid. And so they have less tally marks on those experiences. And I would really personally, and this is true for many of my clients and the clients who come into my Practice Best Life to see other coaches and therapists, they want somebody who gets it on a deep level. And I realized a different thing about this. That wasn't a good word. A different aspect of this issue. When I read recently for continuing education, we have to get X amount of continuing education as a licensed psychologist, right? And so one of the things you could do is read a book and then take a quiz about the book. And so, I like to read. And so I read this book. It's called Bearing the Unbearable by Joanne Cacciatore. And it was a great book, about grief. And the whole part that was the hook that really made you realize she knew what she's talking about is that she lost a child. One of her children died as a baby. So, and that helped shape her as a clinician. And then she started working with other grief-stricken people. And she has a anecdote in the book where she went to multiple therapists and they just tried to help her get over the grief, like almost like it made them uncomfortable. Nobody wants to be around grief and to think, oh my God, this could happen to me and I'll be plunged into despair. Subconsciously you want to push away something so negative, even as a clinician. And her perspective is that you shouldn't, right? And of course, that is correct. You want to sit with and honor that grief and not push it away too quickly, because then it's going to come back in other ways. It's like whack-a-mole, as I've said before. A useful thing that I learned in my training was if you, it's like whack-a-mole. If you push down a thought or a feeling, it's just going to come up somewhere else, like in nightmares or intrusive thoughts or shaping the ways that you interact with other people in not healthy ways, etc. So her point is to sit and honor the grief. And she came upon this whole field of study because she lost a child. As I was saying, she went to multiple therapists. One of them in particular, she felt was very kind of uncomfortable with her idea, with her grief. And I mean, she had lost a baby recently and she was very upset, obviously. And so she was more, angry at his response. And she said to him, do you have children? And he said, no, but my wife is pregnant. And she said, well, I hope you never go through what I'm going through. And then she got up and she walked out. And then in her she continues to write that a few weeks later, he called her and he said, I wanted to tell you that I apologize for how I treated you in session. We've lost the baby. So she said the wife had a miscarriage, and he said, and now I understand really what grief is. And then she went to him, and it was kind of unclear, but it seemed like maybe it was going to be her first grief client or something of her own, grief practice. And so she talks in the book about how important grief support groups are, talking to other people who have grieved. And I'll tell you, if I was grieving, this is who I would want to go to, right? Because she experienced it. And there's something about that experience that's transformative. And if you have grieved, if you are grieving, I mean, most people have grieved the loss of somebody by midlife. Well, it's a good book to read, particularly if you've lost somebody like in an unexpected, very traumatic way, such as a child in any way, or somebody's, unexpected to a car accident, something like that. She doesn't talk as much about losing somebody to old age, like a grandparent, because things like that are more expected. But of course, that could be traumatic as well. I remember when I lost my grandmother, I was 21 and I was very close to her. So that was, obviously very upsetting. But I cannot imagine that being similar to losing a child. The point is, though, is that you're going to go to Dr. Joanne Cacciatore, right? I mean, that's who you would go to. Like, if you're picking for grief between me and Joanne Cacciatore, go to her, 100%, right? And so the point being, is lived experience important? Yes, of course. Would you want to go to a support group filled with people for the issue that you want to get support on that haven't experienced the issue? I mean, sometimes people just put, like an authority figure that you're going to, like a therapist, on a pedestal, and they think, oh, they must have some other knowledge that makes up for maybe it doesn't matter if they've had a certain experience. Yeah, it does matter. It does matter. If you're looking to work on parenting issues, I would think you would go to a parent. And I always say, when people write in to work with my people at Best Life, I say, do you prefer lived experience as a parent? Because I would want somebody to say that to me. And people who are dealing with aging, for example, they usually want to go to somebody older. It feels absurd to sit and talk to somebody in their late 20s about aging. Sure, they could be so smart and they could be skilled clinically, but they're not going to have a certain experience that's core to what you want to discuss. And I've discussed this previously, but I was fearful that my own divorce years ago would stop people from wanting to come in to see me as a couples counselor, but it was the opposite. It was I divorced, I remarried, and people were like, oh, here's somebody who has experienced marital dysfunction and divorce. I mean, it didn't hurt that I wrote a book, How to Talk to Your Kids About Your Divorce, but, I got many more clients who were divorced after I had on social media my own remarriage, than I did before. Because people, even though I wrote the book before. And so it's people obviously are drawn to somebody who they think has experienced the thing that they're working on. And it's best, of course, if they think the person has experienced that and has gone on to be happy and fulfilled. Of course, that's the goal. You wouldn't want to see Dr. Cacciatore if she just, never moved into this field and this growth and used this grief as this catalyst for all of this self-growth, right? I mean, if she was just holed up in her room, not writing a book and not seeing clients in perpetuity for 20 years, then that would not be who you would see, although she wouldn't be seeing you either in that hypothetical. But so obviously it helped that I remarried and that people saw that I had a happy family and this and that in social media. But point being, if you want to pick somebody who's had a similar experience to you, do it, right? I mean, this is why I have my people put the lived experience on their bio. Dr. Akers has 2 adult children and blah, 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 and lives with her husband, this kind of thing. Because if you want to work on marriage, why would you be with somebody that wasn't married? And if they've been divorced, I put divorced. If they've been married again, put married again. If you would want to work on depression, honestly, not everybody's going to share that, and the reason is not nefarious. The reason is that's true emotional labor. Already you're sitting with somebody else's pain. So to have to sit with talking about the insides of your own self, if people are asking, is hard for a lot of people. I mean, I've shared that I've experienced depression, but, but I'm a more experienced person at this point. If somebody starts to be like, oh, well, how many days a week, if you experience depression for, or some questions that are making the session about me, I'm like, this is about you, but a lot of people don't want to share individual things like that. But I'll tell you, the ones that do, you really understand more about them. Like Marsha Linehan years ago now shared that she herself had borderline personality disorder diagnosis when she was a young girl, or teenager, or a young adult. And really made sense of everything, why she developed DBT for borderline, right? Because she was. So it makes a lot of sense. I've shared that I like to work with high conflict couples because my parents were a high conflict couple. So I know what it's like to be that child in that family. And that's impetus for me to help them more because I understand what the child is feeling so I could speak to it. And this doesn't mean that every child experiences the same thing or that every person with depression is the same or every person that divorces is the same. But there is a commonality. It's only common sense, right? It's only common sense. And this is why, by the way, so many women now choose to go to OBGYNs that are female. Because they've had a vagina, you know, I mean, like that they have that experience. They have the experience of menstruating. They have the experience of menopause, whatever it is that you want to think about. So if you are looking for lived experience in a provider, listen, the world is not perfect. Sometimes you got to go with who's in your area or who accepts insurance or who is on your employee assistance plan. People could be wonderful clinicians, but if you yourself have the possibility and you've thought, oh, is it stupid? Is it like irrelevant given that somebody has all this training and all this skill? Then is it irrelevant to sort on the variable of commonality of life experience? Definitively not, right? I think it's very important. And you would pick it in a friend, you would pick it in a coworker. As I've said, I'm going to link to the other podcast. If you want to understand the other experience, such as your husband's experience, your wife's experience, whatever, you could go cross to the other gender. If you want to understand your child, frequently a younger therapist can really help you understand your child if you're looking to understand your child. But if you want somebody who, like, for example, with estrangement, talking to a therapist for yourself who's has children can understand that pain, right? A lot differently than maybe somebody that is only understands your child's pain because they're the age of your child. However, and this, is just a very important thing. If your child that you're estranged from asks you to go to any therapist, I don't care if that person's 16 years old, Doogie Howser therapist, you go, right? Because that's the only way you're going to get your child to talk to you again. And I talk a lot about estrangement, so we work with estrangement, so reach out. But point being, TLDR, lived experience is very important. Basic core human experiences that make you similar to one another, particularly in the relational sphere, life experiences that you have had, such as parenting, such as marriage. I mean, these are things that you don't know what they're going to be like until you're in them. And you don't know that you don't know. Didn't you think you'd be a good parent when you were pregnant, right? You didn't know shit. I didn't know shit, right? And then you have a kid and you're like, oh my God, this is different than I thought in myriad ways. All right, hope you guys enjoyed this and got something out of it. And again, if you ever need a therapist or a coach, look at bestlifebehavioralhealth.com or reach out to me at Samantha at drpsychmom.com, and I can always match you with somebody. I have like very, very few openings now, if any, but me or somebody else. All right, talk to you guys later. Have a great day. Bye-bye.